and, quote, there was no financial impropriety of any nature. Finally, to language, and as we know, language is an ever-evolving art of communication. It's changed throughout the ages, continues on like that. But the latest development in the evolution has a number of people stumped, in particular the full stop. According to linguists, the use of punctuation, especially full stops, is intimidating to a lot of young people because it comes off as a sign of anger in social media messages. To discuss this, I'm joined by Catherine Robertson. She's a member of the Academy of New Zealand Literature, whose books are all #1 New Zealand bestsellers. Kia ora, Catherine.
Kia ora.
So, do you use full stops in your books?
Well, I do, of course, yes. But I mean, I think, we're talking about a different kind of context.
Yes.
We're talking about social media, aren't we?
That's right.
And I think in particular it was putting full stops at the end of, signing off with a full stop. And I mean, for me, punctuation is first about clarity, but it is also about emphasis. We use different kinds of punctuation for different emphasis. And those things can change. I mean, we know that all caps in social media and online is shouting.
Very true.
That's become sort of well accepted. And I think punctuation, it does have distinct everything, even from, that's why emojis were invented, to be a short form way of creating some form of communication. And we have to be, in these tiny little pieces of communication, everything counts. So I can see why perhaps a use of a full stop as an emphasis at the end of the sentence could be seen to have perhaps more aggression than it was intended.
Yeah, email-wise, T. Wheeler, I don't know about you, I actually don't use full stops anymore, I just realised. I'll use a Patrick is a punctuation aficionado, so let's go to T. Wheeler first. What do you think?
Yeah, I've actually never thought that much about whether or not someone uses a full stop. Usually if I get a text where someone's trying to be offensive, it's quite clear in the language. Yeah. So full stop or no full stop, it's never really
Neither
thought.
way.
Yeah.
Patrick?
Well, now that Catherine's talking about it, I realise that on social media in particular, I've become a great fan of the 3 full stop method. Is it
the ellipsis.
The dot.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, sorry. But when I first heard about this, I thought, oh, give me a break. I mean, here I am trying to stay, hip with the kids, and now I can't even use a freaking full stop. But then I was subbing some copy today, and I thought, hang on, what about the comma as a weapon? Because there's a lot of comma use that's going on.
There's a lot of comma use.
Yeah,
I think the semicolon is the weapon to be wielded with most caution, isn't it, really?
Probably, although I am a big fan of the colon myself. And the dash, I feel, is an underexplored area.
I'm a big dash person.
Yeah.
Love the dash. But I'm just not a fan of the full stop. I actually do agree with this article, Catherine, that it does come across short sentences, full stop, a little bit intense.
Well, I like the way that Patrick said he uses the ellipsis, because that suggests that the conversation is still going. Something else will happen. You know what I mean? And so I can see why, the full stop at the end of it means I'm done. I'm done talking. This is not a conversation. So, ellipsis.
I'm quite offended by this music coming on. It almost seems to imply something.
Yeah, ... to be continued.
Yeah, or slightly threatening. What next?
Thank you, Catherine. Patrick Smelly, Te Wera Fuutai, thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45. Bye.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo rerangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine, at sentencing, the Christchurch mass murderer is described as a piece of trash and a maggot that deserves to be buried in a dump. Cyber attackers have brought the stock exchange to its knees 2 days in a row. How exactly and why? An Auckland church is at the centre of a mini cluster of COVID cases. The Mental Health Foundation slams secure facilities that are harming patients rather than helping. The family of Wisconsin man Jacob Blake, shot 7 times by police, fear he may be permanently paralysed. Are New Zealanders rubbish at recycling? And just when you need it, some good news. We'll be featuring a dancing rhino, a baby dancing rhino.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, ko Anna Thomas Tane. The son of a man who was murdered at Al Noor Mosque has told the gunman he is trash. Ahad Nabi was delivering his victim impact statement at the High Court in Christchurch on the third day of Brenton Tarrant's sentencing. Ahad Nabi told the killer his father, Haji Daud Nabi, would have broken him in a fight.
Your father was a garbage man, and you became trash of society. He is ashamed of your identity. You deserve to be buried in a landfill. This world was created with colour. A peasant like you will never change the human race.
Ahad Nabi says he is strong and the terror attack has made him stronger. The court has been hearing from 28 victims today. The Prime Minister is confident contact tracing will eventually reveal a link between 5 cases associated with a church and the Auckland cluster. People who attended services and a wedding at the Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship Church between the 7th and 11th of this month are being urged to get tested. Jacinda Ardern says tracing will get to the bottom of it.
All the way through, we have had sporadically cases that have taken slightly longer to link. What I have is a lot of confidence in our public health unit and the investigatory work that they do, tracing events, tracing clusters, tracing cases.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. The Health Minister is assuring people here on expired visas they will not be deported if they come forward for a COVID test. Chris Hipkins says the government will not use any information that's collected through testing for immigration purposes. Mr Hipkins says they don't want anyone who's at risk or may potentially have the virus to be scared of coming forward to have a test.
Regardless of your personal circumstances, if you are asked to get a test or you're in that group that's at greater risk, please get the test. We won't use that information to punish you in some other way, and I cannot state that enough.
Chris Hipkins. Officials have found no evidence of wrongdoing by Team New Zealand and its spending of millions of dollars of public funds. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment suspended payments to the events arm in July after allegations of spying and claims about its finances and management. Its investigation has found none of Grant Dalton's expenses were paid using public funds and, quote, there was no financial impropriety of any nature. Gone by lunchtime is how the National Party is describing its plans for the fresh water standards due to be implemented from next week. It puts controls on farming practices such as winter crop grazing and feedlots and sets stricter limits on nitrogen pollution. The comments were made by National's agriculture spokesperson David Bennett in a Facebook live video yesterday. The National Party leader Judith Collins later went on to say in the video that the Environment Minister David Parker hates farmers. David Parker says the comments are untrue and the phrase gone by lunchtime didn't work last time when Don Brash used it and won't work this time. The stock exchange has been hit by cyber attacks for 2 days in a row, shutting down trading for hours. NZX trading was cut short by an hour yesterday afternoon. Then again this morning, it traded for about an hour before coming to a halt again. It's been hit by an attack where a website gets overwhelmed with traffic, so it shuts down. AUT computer science professor Dave Parry says it's not something you often hear of.
It's quite rare for the same place to be attacked more than once, and it indicates that whoever's doing the attacking is probably fairly significantly skilled.
Professor David Parry. An Invercargill City Councillor hopes a government probe into tensions among elected members will improve behaviour. Internal Affairs is working out whether the local government minister needs to take any action. The council has voted to proactively tackle the problem. Councillor Lindsay Abbott says it's an opportunity to reflect on how the council can improve.
Totally, it wasn't unexpected. I think it's a good thing sometimes for us to, any individual or any community service or even any private service, to actually have a good look at itself, and here's an opportunity to do that.
Invercargill City Councillor Lindsay Abbott. It's 5:04. In sport, transferring the North versus South Inter-Island rugby match to Wellington is bittersweet for the New Zealand Rugby Union. The match was initially scheduled for this Saturday at Eden Park, but NZR pushed the date back by a week due to Auckland being at Alert Level 3. New Zealand Rugby has now confirmed it will be played at Wellington's Sky Stadium on Saturday week, but there'll be no spectators as Wellington will still be at Alert Level 2. NZR's Chris Landrum says while it's disappointing they've had to move the game and there'll be no crowds, they were determined to play the game.
We were always committed to trying to do this any way we could. It's the preeminent fixture on the calendar at the moment, right? I know the players are hugely excited to play. They will have had a couple of weeks off and will be absolutely raring to go.
Chris Landrum. The head of the NRL's Coaches Association, former Kangaroo Mal Meninga, is demanding clubs be held more accountable after the worst year for coaches in the competition's history. Anthony Seibold, who has parted ways with the Brisbane Broncos, is the fifth coach to go this year, topping the four who went mid-season in 1994 and 2014. The axing of the Warriors, Stephen Kearney, with more than 2 years left on his deal, started the clean-out, and Meninga says he's unhappy about the ease at which clubs are getting rid of coaches during the harshest climate the game has endured. He says while club success is paramount, he questions when the club leaders who employ the coaches will become accountable too. And that's the news.
It's an illness with no easy cure.
We are borrowing every single dollar here that we are paying out, and we have delivered 22 weeks of payment.
The opposition smells opportunity on the wage subsidy.
We've heard the government say it's too hard for them to work out the admin on it. Well, if it's that bad, then give it a week.
As the pandemic unfolds.
A lot of people are anxious and also just feeling a little bit scared.
Clarifying a new reality. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Lisa Owen and Checkpoint up next, but first the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, a few showers, but a period of rain tomorrow afternoon. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers clearing this afternoon, but a period of rain or showers tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waikato to Kapiti, including the Central High Country, isolated showers today, rain or showers tomorrow with hail, clearing later. Wairarapa to Wellington, fine today, showers developing around midday tomorrow with possible hail, clearing later. Buller and Westland, showers spreading north this afternoon, followed by a period of rain tomorrow morning before clearing. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago and Inland Otago, mainly fine, a few showers tomorrow. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, showers in Fiordland and coastal Southland, spreading elsewhere this evening, and snow lowering to 500 metres tomorrow morning. Showers clearing tomorrow afternoon, but lingering in Fiordland. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. RNZ National. It is 5:08. I'll be back with the headlines at 5:30.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora and welcome to Checkpoint. Brenton Tarrant has been described as a piece of trash in another day of emotive and at times angry victim impact statements at his sentencing in Christchurch. The judge is expected to hand down his sentence tomorrow on 51 charges of murder, 40 charges of attempted murder and a charge of committing a terrorist act. For much of the week, the mass murderer has sat expressionless as nearly 80 victim impact statements have been read to the court. But that hasn't stopped those whose lives have been turned upside down by his actions, describing their torment. Our reporter Logan Church is at the High Court in Christchurch, and just a warning, his story does contain details that some may find distressing.
Your father was a garbage man, and you became trash of society. He is ashamed of your identity. You deserve to be buried in a landfill.
That's the son of Haji Daoud Nabi, staring down mass murderer Brenton Tarrant today and telling him what he thought of him.
I would like to say that my 71-year-old dad would have broke you in half if you challenged him to a fight. I'm strong, and you made me even stronger. Allahu Akbar.
Thank you, Mr. Nabi.
Haji Daoud Nabi died after being shot at Al Noor Mosque. His son, Ahad Nabi, told the court his father was a strong leader and a great role model. He made a request of the judge in considering his sentence.
I asked that he be put in mainstream prison and stop wasting taxpayer money on giving him special treatment and protection.
Sarah Kassem's father, Abdul Fattah, was shot at El Noor Mosque. She too explains the devastation his death has brought on her life.
My heart sinks, my stomach drops, and my face hums because I knew exactly what you had done to my beautiful father at that very moment. My sweet, devoted father who never missed a Friday prayer.
She paid tribute to her father, who she described as a hero and a shining, glimmering man.
I wish more than anything in the world that I could have been there to hold his hand and tell him that it would all be okay. All a daughter ever wants is her dad. I want to go on more road trips with him. I want to smell his garden source cooking. His cologne.
Ms. Kassem issued a challenge to Terence.
I urge you to take a look around this courtroom and ask yourself, who exactly is the other here right now? Is it us? Or is it you? I think the answer's pretty clear.
Mohammed Hussein was killed in the Linwood Mosque. Bullets hit his right shoulder and upper chest. His niece, Widad Mohammed Hussein, told the court her father was trying to call for help when the gunman shot him.
When you started shooting right, left and centre, my uncle was on the phone to 111, trying to get help just like I know he would in any situation. Then you executed him in cold blood.
But Mohammed's sister, Hasmin, says as a result of the killings, the world has become more united, and more people than ever were aware of Islam. She spoke to the court beside a large picture of her brother.
This tragedy has brought the world together and marked history. There was no ethnicity, race, or creed. We stood as one family. By Allah's grace, Islam is better understood nowadays. Thanks for your contribution, whether it was a very nice one.
The court also heard from the family of Muwaid Ibrahim. He was just 3 years old, the youngest victim of the mosque massacres. His father, Aidan Dedier, says he was loved by all and used to run around the house and pretend to be a police officer. He says he can't understand the killer's callous hatred, a sentiment shared by many who spoke today. About 80 victim impact statements have been delivered this week, each a story of individual tragedy, but a tragedy shared by all those impacted by Terrence's heinous actions. A sentence is expected to be handed down tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
An Auckland church is at the centre of a mini cluster of COVID-19 cases, with 5 people testing positive for the virus in recent days. Health authorities expect the group will be linked to the main outbreak, but no connections have been discovered so far. It comes as the government announced today that from Monday, public transport operators must display the official QR code for commuters to sign in. Hamish Cardwell has more.
The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says 5 people associated with the Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship Church have tested positive for COVID-19 in the past few days. He says anyone who is at the following events should get tested.
They are services held at the church, which is on Stoddard Road, on the 8th, 9th or 11th of August, and a wedding held at the church on Friday the 7th of August. Anyone who attended these events and is currently unwell or has experienced any signs of COVID-19 in the past 2 weeks should stay at home, except when getting their test.
Dr Bloomfield believes the group will eventually be linked to the Auckland cluster.
At this point, they're all connected to each other, but we haven't found the epidemiological link to the cluster, and we're waiting for the whole genome sequencing. So we believe they will be linked to the cluster. We haven't got the epidemiological link yet, but they are all, so they're like a mini cluster at the moment. And those cases, with the case of the person who presented to North Shore Hospital on Friday night, and we've found no other cases around that person, plus the person who had previously been in a MIF facility and was associated with the travel by a relative to Hobbiton. They're our only cases that we haven't yet got either an epidemiological or genome link to the current outcast.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is also confident contact tracing will reveal the link.
All the way through, we have had sporadically cases that have taken slightly longer to link. What I have is a lot of confidence in our public health unit and the investigatory work that they do, tracing events, tracing clusters, tracing cases.
In other developments today, the Minister of Health, Chris Hipkins, announced that from Monday, public transport operators must display the government's COVID-19 tracing app QR code. That's the same day that commuters will be required to wear masks on buses, planes, taxis and rideshare services, although whether children will be exempt is yet to be announced. Mr Hipkins says signing in with the app will give commuters and drivers greater peace of mind.
Public transport involves people being in close proximity to one another. And while some public transport companies do have ways of identifying passengers through ticketing systems, much like airlines and intercity coaches can, it isn't widespread enough to provide us with the universal coverage that we are looking for.
Mr Hipkins says operators will not be required to make people scan the code, and they will have until next Friday to display it. Dr Bloomfield announced today there are 5 new cases of COVID-19, 2 in managed isolation and 3 in the community. 2 are contacts of cases that were already known about and 1 is under investigation. The total number of active cases is 134, of which 21 were detected in managed isolation. Tracing has identified 2,422 close contacts, and all but 54 of those have been contacted and are self-isolating and getting tests.
There are now 163 people who are linked to the cluster who have been moved into the Auckland quarantine facility, and this includes 90 people who have tested positive, as well as household contacts. Today there are 9 people receiving hospital-level care for COVID-19, all are part of the Auckland community outbreak. There are 2 patients at Auckland City Hospital, both are stable and in isolation on a ward. 3 patients at North Shore Hospital, 2 are stable in isolation on a ward. 1 is in intensive care in a critical condition, and there are 4 patients with COVID-19 in Middlemore Hospital. 2 are stable, and each of these in isolation on a ward. 2 are in ICU and considered critical.
Dr Bloomfield says labs processed 8,559 tests yesterday. That's shy of the daily goal of 10,000 tests a day over the next 7 days, making 70,000 in total. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell-Aho.
Today was the first day of a supposed COVID testing blitz, with steady demand at testing centres but no major increase in numbers. The government's encouraging people without symptoms in South and West Auckland to be tested this week to ensure the Auckland cluster, now with 108 cases, is contained. Jordan Bond reports.
The queues at Auckland's COVID testing centres today are night and day from what they had been. 2 weeks ago, queues were so long the tail ended in different suburbs. Those long waits have now subsided and made way for no wait at all.
Oh yeah, I know. We're lucky to come down. There's no one here, so very lucky. It's pretty quick.
All up was only about 10, 15 minutes, if that, eh?
Yeah.
This mother and son at the Otara testing centre had heard the government wanted more testing. And with a centre just down the road from them, it was an easy decision.
You know, me being the old girl, and me being looking after the kids, I thought I'd better. People should get it anyway. It's costing them nothing, you know, just to make sure that the country's going to be free of it.
The latest figures from yesterday show labs processed 8,500 tests, up from each of the previous 2 days, which were around 4,500. That'll be an encouraging figure for the government, but it's still below the 10,000 it wants each day over the next week to be sure the cluster is not leaking out undetected. To help this, there's been a slight change in tack from the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield.
Of course, anyone with symptoms should get a test, but also people who don't have symptoms, and in particular in that Pacific community in West and South Auckland, I would encourage them to also go and seek a test.
The Health Minister, Chris Hipkins, says there's now an abundance of testing centres and is encouraging asymptomatic people in South and West Auckland to go.
There are 1,121 places that you can be tested across the country. 350 of those are in the Auckland metropolitan area. So there is certainly plenty of availability of testing. We're also looking at how we increase our asymptomatic testing in those areas where we just want to increase our testing numbers for the purposes of reassurance.
One of the new pop-up centres, which opened yesterday at Randwick Park near Manurewa, had just one person there when RNZ arrived today. Only one swab was taken there yesterday afternoon and about 20 by mid-morning today. Dr Bloomfield says these temporary pop-up centres are targeted and portable.
These locations have been identified as places where populations who we do want to get more testing done in will be able to access the testing, and we will move, or the DHB will move them around the region to make sure that those populations, particularly the Pacific population in South and West Auckland, have ready access to testing.
The Health Minister's hoping testing fatigue hasn't set in. Finding positive cases quickly is the most important tool to getting the city back to normal. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
It is almost 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme so far this evening. Are you going to participate in that testing blitz if you're in West Auckland or South Auckland, even if you haven't got any symptoms? The call is to get tested. Are you going to do it? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A computer expert says a second cyber attack on the New Zealand Stock Exchange in as many days suggests an organised offshore group is behind the takedown of a high-profile target. The NZX went offline at 6:24 this morning, with normal operations resuming at 3 this afternoon. It was also offline yesterday for about an hour after a distributed denial of service attack. Professor Dave Parry of AUT's Department of Computer Science explains exactly what that is.
What's happened is there's been a thing called a distributed denial of service attack, which sounds very exciting. But effectively what's happened is that an attacker had sent some viruses or other programs out to a very large number of computers and told them, taken control of them, and is sending them instructions to send lots of requests for data to the NZX Stock Exchange. So just like in a browser, we type the URL and we send a request for data. What they've done is they've done that automatically with probably thousands of computers that they're controlling.
So they've utterly overwhelmed the stock exchange, basically.
That's right, yes, that's exactly right.
So would you consider that a pretty unsophisticated attack?
Look, it's these things in principle are quite unsophisticated, but actually to be able to do it 2 days in a row, when there'll be countermeasures being run by the ISPs in New Zealand, so they'll be blocking certain computers and things like that, means that they're more than just probably somebody in a basement somewhere. There'll be some sort of organised group behind this.
Does it surprise you that they have been able to take down the stock exchange 2 days in a row?
It's quite unusual. I mean, it's not unheard of, but it does imply that there's quite a lot of sophistication and quite a lot of effort going into doing this, which you don't normally get in these circumstances. So it is quite surprising, yes.
So should the exchange have learnt from yesterday's experience and done better today?
I think the exchange probably did learn a lot from yesterday's experience. The problem is that you're constantly in a battle between the defence and the attack in these circumstances. And I suspect that the attackers have got a lot of tricks up their sleeve, which are quite hard to defend against. And of course, from the exchange point of view, it's so critical to be able to have the transactions occur very quickly, but also be completely reliable, that they are very vulnerable to this. They can't just sort of like take a chance. They really have to be very certain that they can protect themselves or they shut down. So they've done the safe thing today. How serious is it that this has happened? This is a serious attack. This is a major infrastructure for New Zealand. It's a high-profile organisation, and there will have been quite a lot of effort being put in to do this. So I believe this is quite a serious attack, which I don't know the motives, of course. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's reputation, sometimes there's intergovernment stuff. But certainly whoever's doing this is taking some effort and some time, and they are seriously treating this as something they want to do. So, given what you know about these kinds of things, who do you think could be behind it? Well, there's always a very long list of these things. Mostly large criminal organisations are the people that you generally look to. Terrorist organisations have done this in the past. Governments have done this in the past. But for a financial target like this, you'd normally be thinking about some sort of overseas criminal organisation, which would be based somewhere where there's less control of the use of computers, and also with access to a large pool of poorly secured computers. So that's quite a lot of the world. But often you look at places like former Eastern Bloc, Russia in particular, but also other countries as well have these groups there. In general, what's happened with things like Interpol is that some areas which were known to be particularly poorly controlled have actually brought their game up quite a lot. So Macau, for example, is now much better than it was. But there are simply areas where the rule of international law in this area doesn't really apply.
Are we seeing more of this?
Yes, we're seeing more of this. We only really see the tip of the iceberg with these things. If the traditional way, I suppose, that these gangs make money is they ransom. So they say, we'll keep on attacking you until you pay us some money, or we'll threaten to attack you, or whatever. In those cases, this stuff isn't publicised, really. Very rarely do you find out about that. However, general sort of attacks are becoming more common. So the defences are getting better as well. But yes, there are lots of these attacks happening all around the world, all of the time.
So what's going to be happening behind the scenes? And I don't mean from the stock exchange's point of view with making it right. I mean on a bigger scale as to finding out who is behind this, what their motivations might be, and whether they're eyeing up anything else.
Yeah, so there'd be certainly the ISP would be collecting information about where the attacks are coming from. So that would be the Internet Protocol addresses of the computers. Normally, you can get some idea about physically where those are based, and then the emergency response team CERT would be looking at that and comparing that to previous attacks to see if there's a known model. Then that information would be being shared around the world, both by the intelligence services, but also by the Interpol and other agencies that share this information in order to see if it fits the profile of a previous attack where there might be some intelligence about who's been doing it. The biggest issue with all of these things is that when you set up your attack, where you are and where the attack is apparently coming from can be very, very different places. So one of the issues that's happened recently, of course, is that millions of people are now working from home, probably with poorer security on their computers, often using free Wi-Fi. So there are a lot more computers that are vulnerable to being used as these bots than they were. So there's a sort of bit of a golden opportunity at the moment for the attackers to exploit those with the less control from the normal security procedures.
So why the stock exchange, do you think?
Well, it's a high-profile organisation, so that's good. If I was thinking on the attacker point of view, I'd say, well, if I was going to ransom people in general, I can point to this now. It's been reported, so that I can prove that I can do it. It's also something that's very critical around rapidity of transactions. It's also open. I mean, there's no point having a stock exchange if you can't actually connect to it. And it's also got some benefits in that it's not a government organisation, so there's unlikely to be the level of investigation or sort of retaliation that you might get from a government-type organisation. And, I mean, I don't know if this affects people, but it's also not a healthcare organisation. The other thing, of course, it's like they say, it's where the money is. I mean, the stock exchange has got plenty of money, so if I was going to look at trying to extort money off people, I'd take people who've got lots of money.
And that's AUT Professor Dave Parry. It's going to take a miracle for him to ever walk again. That from the lawyers for the family of Wisconsin man Jacob Blake, shot 7 times at close range by police as he opened the door of his car where his 3 young sons were waiting for him. The shooting has sparked violent protests across the state, with Jacob Blake's family fearing the 29-year-old who was unarmed might now be permanently paralysed. Bridget Burke reports, and just a warning, if you are watching, some people will find the details disturbing.
They shot my son 7 times. 7 times. Like he didn't matter. But my son matters. He's a human being and he matters.
At a press conference today, Jacob Blake's father describing what he said was the senseless shooting of his son by police as he returned to his car after breaking up a fight between two women on a suburban street. In the back seat of his SUV, 3 of his 6 children aged between 3 and 8. Mobile phone footage captured minutes after the shooting by witnesses showed Jacob Blake lying on the ground in a pool of blood, surrounded by male and female police officers trying to give him first aid.
Y'all just shot him for no reason. I got everything on camera.
He had a bullet go through some or all of his spinal cord, at least 1 bullet. He has holes in his stomach. He had to have nearly his entire colon and small intestines removed. He suffered damage to his kidney and liver and was also shot in the arm. We can all wonder that if all else being equal, would I have been treated that way?
Family attorney Patrick Salvi said Jacob appeared to have been shot 7 times by 1 police officer at point-blank range. The shooting has sparked continued protests, vandalism and looting for 2 nights in a row across the state. The police officers who attended the incident have all been stood down pending an investigation. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump told media today Jacob Blake was unarmed.
Think for a second what other things these police officers could have done instead of firing at least 7 bullets into the back of Jacob Blake Jr., leaving him at this moment paralyzed.
He said doctors were unsure if he would recover.
And because those bullets severed his spinal cord and shattered some of his vertebrae, it is going to take a miracle. It is going to take a miracle for Jacob Blake Jr. to ever walk again.
Jacob Blake's father sobbed as Ben Crump described the trauma witnessed by his grandchildren from the back seat of their car.
These 3 little boys are going to have psychological problems for the rest of their life. Can you imagine what his 8-year-old son, who was celebrating his birthday, is going to think about every time he has his birthday? The pain in his father? Can you imagine? This is real. This is real, America.
Meanwhile, Jacob Blake's mother, Julia Jackson, made an emotional plea for unity, saying her son would be upset with the continued violence and protests.
As I pray for my son's healing, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, I also have been praying, even before this, for the healing of our country.
The governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, has declared a state of emergency and deployed the National Guard to stop looting and arson across the state. Julia Jackson said the shooting was not about a black man being targeted by white police officers.
Clearly you can see by now that I have beautiful brown skin, but take a look at your hand, and whatever shade it is beautiful as well.
Amen. Yes.
How dare we hate what we are? We are humans. God did not make one type of tree or flower or fish or horse or grass or rock. How dare you ask him to make one type of human that looks just like you?
The shooting of Jacob Blake comes just 3 months after the death of George Floyd, which also sparked nationwide protests against police brutality and structural racism in the United States. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, concerns appalling conditions at 2 secure units could deter people from seeking help for mental health. A Wellington heritage house gutted by fire last night faces demolition. And some lockdown cheer. Auckland Zoo welcomes a new baby rhino. A dancing baby rhino. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Anna.
Thanks, Lisa. The Christchurch Mosque gunman has been told he's trash. Victim impact statements have continued on the third day of Brenton Tarrant's sentencing at the High Court in Christchurch. Ahad Nabi lost his father in the killings and in court told Tarrant he has become trash of society. The daughter of another victim told the convicted terrorist to ask himself who is really the outsider. 5 people who attended a wedding or church services at an Auckland church have been diagnosed with COVID-19 in recent days. Anyone who attended services at Mount Roskill Evangelical Fellowship Church on August the 8th, 9th or 11th are being urged to contact Healthline. And pop-up COVID-19 testing stations are being moved around Auckland this week in a bid to ramp up testing rates after a lull. The Director General of Health says people who haven't shown any symptoms are encouraged to get tested too. No evidence of financial impropriety has been found in an investigation into using taxpayer funding for the America's Cup. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has completed its audit into allegations made against Team New Zealand Limited and its events arm, America's Cup Event Limited. But the report has raised concerns about record keeping that it says warrants criticism at a governance and management level. Trading on the stock exchange was disrupted for a number of hours after being hit by cyber attacks for 2 consecutive days. NZX trading was cut short by an hour yesterday afternoon and came to a halt again this morning. It's been hit by an attack where a website gets so overwhelmed with traffic that it shuts down. And a burnt historic house in central Wellington is too dangerous for fire investigators to enter and will need to be demolished. The fire engulfed the century-old building on Abel Smith Street last night in an incident that's being treated as suspicious. Those are the headlines. I'll be back with a full news bulletin and weather at 6 o'clock. It's 24 to 6.
Thanks, Anna, and kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint. Let's go to the business news now with Emma Hatton, who is in our Wellington studio. Emma, Office Max has announced it's closing down all its retail stores. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, that's pretty much sums it up. It's closing down its 14 retail stores. It's moving to online only. 55 staff will lose their jobs, and this will all happen by the end of October. So they've said they've done a retail review of their operations and recognised that the trend towards online shopping and a changed way of working, so working from home or working more flexibly, whatever you want to call it, has been on the cards for a while, but these factors have been accelerated by the pandemic. So, Office Max is a pretty big operation. It's more than just its stores. It employs more than 600 people. A lot of what they do is sort of behind the scenes business to business work, so helping with marketing and distribution and office fit outs and technology and things like that. So it's just a big one-stop shop for anything to do with your office. And, because we are seeing more office workers work from home, some offices are closing permanently. I think it was AMP recently announced they were closing their central offices in Auckland and Wellington. It really does just bring into question the need for such a service like what Office Max was offering with its retail stores. So you can sort of see where they're coming from. I mean, it's obviously not a lot of consolation for those staff that are going to, have their roles disestablished. So, I mean, it is just another COVID casualty, really. It's something we're probably going to see more of as retailers reassess whether their bricks and mortar stores are viable. There are some, where foot traffic is everything. But for others like this, where the environment's changing and they can offer, the majority of their product online or through other channels, may be the way that they go.
Okay, we've had another big dump of earnings reports today too, so shall we just kind of, give us a taster of a few of them?
Yeah, I'll do just a really quick whip around. So we had Spark. The result held up really well against the sort of initial effects of the pandemic. It was only the last quarter that really caught the end of it there. Their profit rose by 4.4% to $427 million, but they do expect this current financial year to be where it really bites. We also had Meridian, full year profit of $176 million, which was actually down 48% on last year, but a lot of that was to do with some sort of on-paper write-downs and bits and pieces. What they're really going to be focused on is getting their business ready for when Tiwai Point Smelter exits the market next year in August, so that's a big focus for them. We also heard from MetLife Care company. They posted a net loss of $33.7 million for the year ended June. And again, that was mostly to do with some on-paper write-downs, so the value of their properties, the value of them have dropped, and that's due to the housing market outlook because of COVID. So, yeah, big day, big companies, lots of earnings. Really not helped by the fact that we couldn't see what the trades were doing on the share market for the most of the day, as you've been reporting. But yeah, big day out there on the markets. And once investors could get back to trading, it was all go.
Yeah, so we have been talking about the fact that there was another cyber attack on the NZX today, but where did the numbers end up? Because they said they were back up and running by 3.
That's right. They were back up and running by 3. It's really high out there. We're actually edging towards where we hit a record high in February. So it closed up 38 points, 1/3%. It's now at 12,031 points. And the record high, which it hit on the 21st of February, was 12,107 points. So that was as high as it got before it started coming down with all the pandemic volatility in mid-February there. So yeah, really high market closing numbers there. Dollar trading at 65.5 US cents, 91 Australian, 49.9 British pence.
Thanks, Emma. That's Emma Hatton joining us from Wellington with our business news today. The Mental Health Foundation is worried appalling conditions at 2 secure units have harmed some patients and will scare people off seeking help. The Ombudsman has named and shamed 2 mental health units, one at Wellington Hospital and the other at Waitakere Hospital, finding some of their practices amounted to degrading, cruel or inhuman treatment. At Waiataro Mental Health Inpatient Unit in West Auckland, patients had excessively long stays with restricted movement because there was apparently no appropriate accommodation for them to move to. And in its seclusion rooms intended for people in imminent danger, patients are given a cardboard box to toilet in. At Wellington's Te Whare o Matarangi Mental Health Inpatient Unit, stark seclusion rooms with barely any furnishings were routinely being used to house patients because the unit was over capacity. Mental Health Foundation boss Sean Robinson says those accounts are disgusting and change is needed now.
I totally endorse the Ombudsman's outrage and the fact that he is naming and shaming. I have seen his reports year after year, and every year we have, said this is completely unacceptable, and to see DHBs accepting the recommendations and then doing nothing about it, and to see Judge Bouchier then spelling things out in pretty graphic detail, the appalling conditions that people who are, these are people who need health care. These are not criminals, they're not people who are in prison, and we wouldn't even accept this kind of treatment for people that were in prison for some heinous crime. So, it's just not good enough. And, in a context where, as a country, we're trying to lift our game about our response to the mental health and well-being of the population, that this kind of atrocious service is still carrying on is just appalling.
Sean, what do you think are the most egregious things in this?
Well, look, I think the captivity nature of it, that someone is, kept in a very confined space, for a prolonged period of time, when mental health services are supposed to be about care, treatment and recovery. Now, so much around mental health is derived from trauma. This is a re-traumatizing situation. As is being put in a seclusion room with no privacy and having to go to the toilet in a cardboard box. I mean, for goodness sake, that would be enough to activate me into considerable mental distress. And I think most people, would become very distressed if they were put in that situation. And yet we're putting people who are already mentally very vulnerable into that situation. It's just appalling.
So the Ombudsman has concluded that in some cases, actually, the treatment was doing harm.
Oh, absolutely. I do think it's doing harm. As I say, I think that kind of treatment is re-traumatising people. It is traumatising, and trauma is a key driver of poor mental health. It's just not okay at all.
When you talk about captivity, what we're talking about here is the unit in particular overseen by Waitemata Health, and people were having very extended stays there, one 621 days, another 344. Just paint a picture for us here, Sean. These services, as I understand it, are supposed to be places of rehabilitation and reintegration. So stays of that long, what do you make of that?
Well, look, I think this is to do with a combination of things. I mean, I do have sympathy for DHB services. I think they are massively under the pump. The demand for those services has sustained at ridiculously high levels, regardless of, the government's attempts to put more money in to alleviate that. I just don't think that has worked yet. And so the services are usually understaffed, and they don't have sufficient space often for people. But I think, another aspect can be the whole service approach. So I don't think DHBs can simply say, oh, look, it's all the government's fault and politicians' fault for not giving us enough resource. I think that is part of the picture, but you still have to orient your service to what it's trying to achieve. And for managers and leaders in those services to be day-to-day accepting those conditions for patients is just, I find that very hard to fathom. And again, I think, another avenue to explore is what has happened to the $300 million that has been put into DHB mental health services, because again, I do know from various mental health staff that sometimes the resources don't seem to make it to the places that they need to get to. So, how are those DHBs using those resources? So, I think it is important to name and shame, and I think Judge Boshier, the Ombudsman, has taken these steps because he hasn't had traction before. But I think if we're sheeting home responsibility and pointing fingers, then I think it's important that all those factors share some of that blame. So politicians, past and present, need to really look at the resourcing that's going into these services and into these units. Managers and leaders in those services need to look at the practices and what's become acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And they also need to look at how have those resources been used in those DHBs, because to be fair, government has been trying to put more resource in. Whether it's enough, I would say it's not enough. I don't think that's a question. I think we know that. But all of those factors are combining to do harm to people that we're supposed to be trying to care for and lead them on a path to recovery, and support them to be able to live the best possible lives they can in the community.
All that said, regarding accountability and who is responsible, does any of that excuse people toileting in cardboard boxes and being confined to units for extended periods of time because there's nowhere appropriate to send them?
No,
next?
It doesn't. It does not at all. And, I think any of the chief executives of the DHBs, any of the service leaders in mental health in those DHBs, any of the managers who are managing resources, this should not be acceptable. They should be drawing a line well before it comes to this. And certainly, to see this happening even for a short time should be enough to sound a very loud alarm and create change. And when the Ombudsman has pointed this out year after year, and they have accepted it that it's not good enough year after year, and yet they make no change, I think this is just disgusting.
How do you think that this could influence whānau who may be faced with, well, the prospect of seeking care for their loved ones, looking at units like this and thinking, wow, do I really want the person I love to go there for treatment?
Well, naturally, it will be, a deterrent, and I think it's important to state that Judge Boshier also pointed out that in many DHBs, this is not the experience, that the service is extremely good. He also pointed out that many staff in these services that are not doing well are extremely caring and doing their best for the people that are there. But, naturally, I would think twice about being admitted to one of these services. I would think twice about letting one of my family or whānau go there, when you've heard these kinds of accounts.
That's a bit sad if that's what help looks like.
It is. And, I think what Judge Boshier is trying to do is sound the loudest alarm that he can and get actual change. So, we actually need to see this change, and we need to see this change now.
And that is Sean Robinson from the Mental Health Foundation. We invited Waitemata DHB on the program this evening to discuss the Ombudsman's criticism of its secure unit, but it declined, instead providing a statement. The DHB says it is fully committed to providing safe and secure treatment facilities for mental health inpatients. In relation to one patient that had an extended stay in its intensive care unit, Waitemata DHB says while it can't comment on specifics for privacy reasons, the patient posed a significant risk to themselves and others, and was unable to be managed in an open environment. And the DHB has implemented an ongoing program of improvement and addressed a number of the Ombudsman's recommendations. Meanwhile, in today's daily COVID briefing, Health Minister Chris Hipkins was asked if it's good enough that 2 DHBs are in breach of the UN Convention Against Torture and Degrading Treatment.
No, it's not. And the government's put a huge emphasis on mental health. And one of the issues that the DHBs are reporting to us is that they are really capacity and space constrained when it comes to mental health. And so some of the worst things that we have seen there are because DHBs just don't have the space that they need. So the government has put a significant amount of additional capital funding in over the last couple of years. And that work is, that's being spent as we speak to improve the quality of those mental health facilities. These things do have a bit of a legacy to them, so you can't just magic up new buildings overnight. It takes a while to build them, but we absolutely acknowledge that some of the facilities that DHBs are working with in the mental health space are not fit for purpose. They are inadequate. They are resulting in a standard of care for people with mental health needs that is not acceptable.
Health Minister Chris Hipkins there. It is 8 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It seems New Zealanders are pretty rubbish at recycling, with 70% of recyclable material going to landfill. But it may not entirely be our fault. A new report out today on standardising curbside collection has found huge regional disparities in what can be recycled. The government hopes a $36.7 million upgrade of 7 recycling plants from Northland to Canterbury will not only slash recyclables going to landfill, but also create jobs. Ruth Hill reports.
Soiled nappies, food scraps and even dead animals. They're just some of the contaminants that turn up in recycling collections. The Environment Minister Eugenie Sage says New Zealand's recycling system currently relies on a lot of manual sorting, and it's dirty work. She says a government investment in high-tech optical sorters, which comes out of the $124 million COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund, will make workplaces safer and speed up the sorting process.
One of the keys to improving materials recovery and reprocessing and recycling is getting clean, uncontaminated materials in a single stream. These sorters will make it much easier to sort out the right sorts of plastics and ensure that those can go off to be reprocessed.
According to World Bank data, New Zealand is the 10th most wasteful country in the world. Waste to leverage landfills has increased by 48% in the last decade, and only 28% of recyclables are recovered. Zero Waste Network Chair Marty Hoffert says most people want to do the right thing, but many of us are confused by the different rules in different parts of the country.
People might come to another area, say Waihi Beach or, as I say, to Queenstown for a holiday, and they've got a recycling bin and they fill it up with a whole bunch of plastics that perhaps aren't collected in that town or that city, and does end up as contamination, and it ends up in a landfill. It should be standardized around the country. I mean, we're that small of a country. We should be doing the same thing in every community.
A recent survey commissioned by the Waste Management Institute, Wastemans, found 51% of householders were uncertain about what they could and could not recycle. Many just resort to bunging it into the recycling bin just in case, which is known as wish cycling. Wasteman's sustainability advisor, Sarah Pritchett, says the government investment in recycling plants will help sort that out. She says, however, one thing councils could do immediately would be to collect the same materials, a key recommendation of the Wasteman's report, standardising curbside collections in Aotearoa, prepared for the Ministry for the Environment.
That would reduce household confusion if all councils were collecting the same materials. That would lead to reduced contamination and reduced wish cycling and increase the quality of recyclable material for onshore processes.
Local Government New Zealand President Stuart Crosby says it will take time to standardise curbside recycling, partly because of existing contracts. He admits there may be some job losses at some centres in the short term, but the environmental benefits will be huge.
So overall, there will be a benefit to everybody. And if the industry grows, which we hope it does, then certainly there'll be more employment opportunities.
Eugenie Sage says international experience shows there are more jobs and more skilled jobs in resource recovery than in old-fashioned waste collection and disposal to landfill. The report's other recommendations include incentivising councils to collect food waste, collecting glass separately from other recyclable materials, and promoting best practice. The Zero Waste Network says the packaging industry and consumers need to play their part too and stop making and buying stuff that's going to end up as rubbish. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
Auckland Zoo has announced the arrival of its much-anticipated baby rhino, the first calf born at the zoo in 20 years. The baby girl rhino was born on August 14 and is the first child of 30-year-old southern white rhino, Jamila. Jamila delivered her baby in just 1 hour after a 16-month pregnancy, with the newborn tipping the scales at a healthy 65 kilograms. Our reporter Nick Trubridge spoke to Auckland Zoo ungulates team leader. Yes, ungulates, you say. That is the big mammals with hooves, zebras, hippos, giraffes, some of my favourites. Anyway, Nick called up the team leader there, Tommy Carlson, and charged in with the question on everyone's mind.
So we don't have a name at the moment, but we are going to do something for the public to help us find a good name. So check on social media for updates around that.
Can you give us an idea of some of the names that have been thrown around the office, some of the early ideas?
No, we have a list with probably 30 names with different suggestions, ideas. So it's kind of in a brainstorming stage at the moment.
Has Ashley Bloomfield come up as a potential name?
No. There was another rhino named Ashley Bloomfield, right? And I read an article about that. Somewhere in Africa, they named a baby rhino after him. So we're probably going to go in a different direction.
So how is the young rhino doing?
Oh, she's doing fantastic. She's growing a lot every day, so she's getting a lot bigger already. You can see that she is like getting rounder. Her belly is full with milk. No, but she's doing great. She is following her mom brilliantly. She suckles regularly, sleeping good. She's getting more and more active every day and moving in between the different yards here at the back of house. And no, she's doing fantastic.
Because what are the key things you're sort of, I suppose, checking on in terms of the health of the animal at this stage?
So we're observing how much she's drinking, how much she's sleeping, how she follows her mom, her movements, that she's peeing and pooing okay, and then just in general, like how she responds to us. And so far it's been perfect. She's been doing everything a rhino baby should do, and she's developing just great.
And that is Auckland Zoo's Tommy Carlson speaking to Nick Trubridge. Now, if you were listening to that on radio, we're going to put the pictures up on our Facebook page. They're absolutely gorgeous. The little lono sort of jumping around doing a bit of a dance. As you would have heard there, they are looking for a name. So get in touch with your suggestions. Ashley Bloomfield is not a goer. There was a rhino overseas named Ashley Bloomfield. They've ruled that out already and they're keen for suggestions. Let us know what you reckon. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We need a little bit of cheering up. Some good news there. And like I say, pictures are an inspiration. Have a look and see what name fits her best. Some of you are getting in touch on COVID testing here. We'll get to that after the news.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Convicted terrorist Brenton Tarrant will not address the court. The 29-year-old is facing sentence for the murder of 51 worshippers at 2 Christchurch mosques on March the 15th last year. The final of 93 victims read their impact statement this afternoon. The Crown will make its submissions tomorrow morning before Pip Hall QC, who had been on standby, will make submissions on behalf of Tarrant. Kerry Cook, an independent counsel assisting the court, will then address the court. Justice Cameron Manda is then expected to begin delivering his sentence sometime tomorrow morning. And in court today, applause broke out as the judge thanked one of the heroes of New Zealand's darkest day, Abdul Aziz Wahabzada, who chased the terrorist from Linwood Islamic Centre using an EFTPOS machine, told Tarrant he was a coward. Following Mr Wahabzada's statement, Justice Cameron Manda paid tribute to him.
Wahabzada, before you go, I've seen the video and I want to acknowledge your courage.
Thank you, Your Honour. Thank you very much.
Justice Cameron Manda. The government's backing the current rules at the border, saying testing and security are serving New Zealanders well. The National Party is questioning why not all people in isolation facilities are getting the Day 3 test, as it's supposed to be compulsory. The Health Minister says more than 20,000 people have had that test since early June, but, for example, young children are not tested. Chris Hipkins says the important test is Day 12. A negative test needs to be returned before anyone can leave. Mr Hipkins says if people refuse, they stay longer in isolation.
15 adults have refused a Day 12 test in total over that period of time. And of course, their stay is extended in managed isolation as a result of that.
Health Minister Chris Hipkins. And pop-up COVID-19 stations will be moved around Auckland this week in a bid to ramp up testing rates after a lull. There are 20 community testing centres and, as of today, 6 mobile testing centres in Auckland. The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says over the next week, people who haven't shown any symptoms are encouraged to get tested too. He says there are new sites in Auckland today and at the same locations tomorrow.
At Ranui Library Car Park, at Ramwick Park School, at Takahemonu, the Tongan Methodist Church, and Mount Smart Stadium. These pop-up sites complement the community testing centres across the Auckland region and will move to different communities every 2 to 3 days.
Ashley Bloomfield. The Environment Minister David Parker has hit back at comments from the National Party that it would do away with the government's freshwater regulations by lunchtime, if elected. The comments were made by National's agriculture spokesperson David Bennett in a Facebook Live video yesterday. The National Party leader, Judith Collins, later went on to say in a video that Mr Parker hates farmers. David Parker says that's not true.
What they're trying to do is to appeal to their base. Judith Collins' polling's gone down from 35% to 25%. They're trying to shore up their base. Instead, they're evaporating it.
David Parker. An investigation into the use of taxpayer money for the America's Cup has found no evidence of financial impropriety. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has completed its audit into allegations made against Team New Zealand Limited and its events arm, America's Cup event. The report found that there was no evidence of financial impropriety or misappropriation of funds. However, it is critical of Team New Zealand's record keeping, given the amount of money coming from taxpayers. Meanwhile, it says $2.8 million stolen by a fraudster would not come out of taxpayer coffers. Campaigners in Hong Kong are condemning the arrests of two prominent Democrat lawmakers in relation to protests a year ago. Local media say at least 10 more people have also been arrested, but the police are yet to confirm the scale of its crackdown. Richard Kimber is in Hong Kong.
High-profile lawmakers Lam Chuk Ting and Ted Hoi Chi Fong were arrested at their homes on Wednesday morning. Lam's Facebook page said he had been detained on suspicion of conspiracy to destroy property outside a local police station during a protest last year, and also taking part in violent clashes at a train station later that month. Those clashes on July 21st are one of the most highly publicised incidents of last year's social unrest. They are a sensitive issue for protesters who say they themselves were the victims of unprovoked attacks from pro-government groups and have accused police of colluding with the attackers. Police have denied any wrongdoing and have accused the protesters of starting the trouble. Richard Kimber in Hong Kong.
It's 6:05. In sport, it was now or never for the North versus South Inter-Island rugby match as far as New Zealand rugby was concerned. The match was initially scheduled for this Saturday at Eden Park, but NZR pushed the date back by a week due to Auckland being at Alert Level 3. New Zealand rugby has now confirmed the game will be played at Wellington Sky Stadium on Saturday week, but there'll be no spectators as Wellington will still be at Alert Level 2. NZR's Chris Lendrum says they considered postponing the game further, but it wasn't really an option.
We did look at moving it back, but moving back brings us into conflict with the Mitre 10 Cup, and we're really keen for that competition to have its own air and have all of our best players available. So it was one contingency, but we didn't look at it for long. We always thought this was probably the last weekend that we could do a game on, and that's what we're doing.
Meanwhile, the former All Black winger Julian Savea will play for Wellington in the upcoming Mitre 10 provincial competition. The 30-year-old returned from French club Toulon in May and joined the Hurricanes as injury cover for the final couple of weeks of Super Rugby Aotearoa, but he never took the field. The Black Caps batsman Ross Taylor has top scored for the Guyana Amazon Warriors in a losing effort against the Jamaican Talawas in the Caribbean T20 Premier League. Guyana batting first made just 108 for 9 in their 20 overs as Jamaica won by 5 wickets. And the legendary Barcelona footballer Lionel Messi has told the Spanish club he wants to leave immediately. The 33-year-old Argentinian star, a 6-time winner of the prestigious Ballon d'Or award, has spent his entire career with the team. And that's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
It is still unclear about what will be broadcast or recorded if he chooses to make a submission.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
What a year 2020 has been. Wouldn't it be nice to have a little reprieve and catch up with friends and family via a nice meal out?
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Lisa Owen and Checkpoint back in a moment, but first the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, a few showers but a period of rain tomorrow afternoon. For the Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers clearing this afternoon but a period of rain or showers tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waikato to Kapiti, including the central high country, isolated showers, rain or showers tomorrow with hail clearing later. Wairarapa and Wellington, fine, showers developing around midday tomorrow with possible hail clearing later. Buller and Western, showers spreading north this afternoon, followed by a period of rain tomorrow morning before clearing. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago and Inland Otago, mainly fine with a few showers tomorrow. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, showers in Fiordland and coastal Southland, spreading elsewhere this evening. And snow lowering to 500 metres tomorrow morning. Showers clearing tomorrow afternoon but lingering in Fiordland. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. RNZ National, it is 6:08. I'll be back with the headlines at 6:30.
Thanks, Anna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The mosque gunman will not be addressing the court before his sentence is handed out. This comes as the reading of victim impact statements finished today. By the time court adjourned, about 90 people had spoken about how the attacks had devastated their lives. Many also showed anger when they were standing just metres away from the gunman. Among those were Jabran Safi, who lost his father, Mate'ula Safi. He addressed Tarrant, flanked by his family.
I want you to know you have not broken our society. You made us even more visible as a Muslim community. I feel sorry for you because you have grown up in an environment where you have not received any love and compassion. I don't know how this justice system will deal with you, but I have peace knowing in the hereafter you'll get what you deserve by the will of the Almighty Allah. Takbir! Allahu Akbar! Takbir! Allahu Akbar! Takbir! Allahu Akbar!
Victims can be heard there chanting in Arabic, "God is great," as they eyeballed and pointed at the killer. Our reporter Logan Church joins us live from Christchurch, and now a warning, some of what we're about to talk about could be upsetting for some people. Logan, some very raw moments again in court today.
Yes, another emotional day full of very powerful victim impact statements. By the end of the day, more than 90 people in total had spoken to the court over this week. Among them today was Abdul Aziz. He was outside the Linwood Mosque when the gunman attacked. He told the court that he was actually outside checking to make sure the people inside had parked their cars correctly. However, when the gunman attacked and he eventually left the Linwood Mosque, Abdul chased after him, picked up a firearm that Tarrant had dropped, and then proceeded to throw it through Tarrant's window, the car window that he was driving. He told the court today that initially he was actually arrested, suspected of being the gunman, later of course released. He also told the courts that when he was in the Central Police Station, he asked the police if he could have 15 minutes alone with Tarrant to see how brave he was without his firearms, and of course that request was refused. But it really showed the real pain and the real passion from the people speaking here today. Also, many here today, Lisa, made attempts to almost dismiss the actions of the gunman, and in some cases dismissing him completely. One of those was Bader Dokan. Take a listen to what he had to say in court.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, it's not for you. You're not a gentle and not a man.
Very powerful comments there, Logan. So tell us, we understand Tarrant won't be speaking to the court tomorrow?
Yeah, so today we can confirm that Brenton Tarrant will not address the court. Of course, that was his right before having a sentence handed down. However, a lawyer, Pip Hall QC, will be, we understand, will be making submissions on behalf of Tarrant. We still expect that this will all be wrapped up sometime tomorrow morning, the end of a very long, very hard saga for the hundreds of people who have been involved in giving those quite harrowing victim impact statements this week.
Thanks, Logan. That's our reporter in Christchurch, Logan Church, who has been sitting through the sentencing there. And as you heard, the gunman has chosen not to speak before his sentencing tomorrow. The Prime Minister says she has complete confidence in the border regime and the government's ability to keep people in isolation facilities if they refuse to be tested as their release date approaches. There's fresh scrutiny on the testing regime, with National claiming not enough is being done to make sure those in managed isolation or quarantine are having a test at day 3, which was part of tougher new rules introduced in June. 15 people have also refused the day 12 test. While the government can't force them to take the test, it can refuse to release them from the border facilities. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The border is New Zealand's greatest vulnerability, and so for good reason is the subject of intense political scrutiny. Back in June, the government made a number of changes to border testing and security after 2 women who would later test positive were allowed to leave on compassionate grounds without a test. Included in the changes were the requirement to have a test on day 3 and day 12 and return a negative test before being released from 2 weeks isolation. The Health Minister Chris Hipkins says more than 20,000 people have received the day 3 test since June the 8th, but not everyone is tested.
Children, for example, are not routinely tested at day 3 unless there is a reason to test them, and so if their parents returned a positive, for example, they would be tested then.
He says the main things to remember are everyone has to do their 2 weeks and no one leaves without a negative test at day 12. But Mr Hipkins says some people have refused.
15 adults have refused a day 12 test in total over that period of time, and of course their stay is extended in managed isolation as a result of that.
National's health spokesperson Shane Reti laid out the implications of a hypothetical unknown positive case who did not get a day 3 test. The first risk would be to close contacts or family, and another to other people in the facilities.
We know there is cohort mixing, unfortunately, in isolation facilities. All those other cohorts are put at risk by this unknown positive.
And he says to those working at the facilities,
if we just don't focus on returnees for a while, staff will be exposed to the unknown positive. Surely that can't be a good thing.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has faith in the current system.
Our managed isolation facilities are very robust. Our testing regime is very robust.
The government does not have the authority to force a test, she says, but does have other options.
On managed isolation, if anyone refuses a test, we have the power, and we have been, keeping people in isolation for longer. We find that quickly changes people's minds.
In Parliament, Mr Hipkins said he was satisfied with the rules in place.
The current requirement is that it's mandatory at day 12 before somebody is released, and I have no intention of changing that because the public health grounds to do so would not be strong enough.
The compulsory wearing of face coverings and masks on public transport and taxis and rideshares from Monday also prompted plenty of questions today, including the age school children would need to wear them on a school bus. Mr Hipkins says college students should be wearing masks or face coverings from Monday, but he'll release the formal advice on specific ages and other details tomorrow. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Gone by lunchtime, that is how the National Party has described its plan to roll back new freshwater standards coming into force from next week. The legislation, only passed earlier this month, puts new controls on farming practices such as winter crop grazing and sets stricter limits on nitrogen pollution. The Green Party says the opposition comments are reckless, and now even National appears to be taking a step back. Here's our political reporter Charlie Drever.
Farmers have long attacked the government's new freshwater standards, describing the regulations as unworkable. On Facebook Live last night, National leader Judith Collins and agriculture spokesperson David Bennett put the political boot in, claiming Environment Minister David Parker doesn't like farmers. They said given power, they'd scrap the regulations.
So David, can we tonight promise, because this is making me very angry that these people would do this, that we'll get rid of them?
They are gone by lunchtime.
Thank you very much, David.
Both Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor and David Parker shrugged off National's comments.
You know, what they're trying to do is to appeal to their base. Judith Collins' polling's gone down from 35% to 25%. They're trying to shore up their base. Instead, they're evaporating it.
Look, I think it's a stupid statement and flies in the face of what most farmers and most New Zealanders want.
Greens Environment spokesperson Eugenie Sage went even further, describing them as reckless.
The NPS and the standards have been developed over years. There were more than 17,000 submissions when it was put out for consultation. It's had major input from iwi and hapu, from farmers, from urban residents, and there's a consensus now we need to get on and protect our rivers.
And later this afternoon, it seemed National is eating its words. When asked for clarification on David Bennett's gone by lunchtime comment, National's Environment spokesperson Scott Simpson had this to say.
Well, I think that's a colloquial way of putting it, but essentially there were 9 issues that were passed by regulation back in, I think it was only the 5th of August, it looks like, and those issues we think need review and in some cases repeal.
Today, the government relented on some farmers' concerns, relaxing new rules on heavy churn of wet soil in areas near feed troughs and gateways. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor said the changes to winter grazing regulations make them more practical.
We've got sensible policies here, but we just have to make sure that we have practical implementation. And so we identified an issue that needed to be changed, and we did so. And we've committed to farmers that will make changes as we work through this process of working from policy to practical implementation.
Federated Farmers Water spokesperson Chris Allen says it's one positive step.
There's a couple of very minor changes there. There's a whole lot of other changes that will be required to allow the document to make sense for farmers to be able to implement it efficiently. But we're open for a discussion with the Minister, and I think that it's an encouraging step.
And National Scott Simpson is pleased changes have been made.
For there to be literally a further watering down of the water reforms, I think goes to show how out of touch the current government is with farmers in the paddock.
Scott Simpson says the current government has stopped engaging with farmers at a practical level. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
A Wellington City councillor who turned his back during a supporting waiata says he meant no disrespect. After the singing stopped, Councillor Sean Rush then blocked an attempt by other councillors to give mana whenua voting rights within the council. Mediana Johnson reports.
Wellington Councillor Jill Day led the request to give mana whenua more power and was supported by 6 other councillors who sung a waiata. During that waiata, Councillor Sean Rush turned to face away from the singers with his arms crossed. He says it was coincidental that he turned around during the waiata, but he has apologised to Councillor Day for it.
I regularly turn and gaze out the window, and that's all I did. It certainly wasn't meant to be disrespectful to mana whenua, to iwi or to Māori.
After the singing finished, he then raised a point of order, arguing the vote should not go ahead. However, he stands by blocking Councillor Day's proposal and says more information is needed on the legality of it first.
In respect to appointing people to subcommittees based on their family heritage, there are Bill of Rights issues, there are United Nations commitments as well. There are race discrimination issues. So these are the sorts of things that need to be fleshed out.
Lambton Ward Councillor Tamitha Paul, who supported Ms Day, says council processes are being used to prevent having a debate on mana whenua representation.
It's really frustrating for me that some of my colleagues said it's not the right time. It's been 180 years since Te Tiriti o Waitangi was signed, and we still haven't talked about this. So if not now, then when? So we actually did feel that we needed to force this decision.
Ms Paul called Sean Rush's refusal to fully acknowledge the waiata disrespectful.
People who are privileged in the way that the world is set up, and specifically the system is set up, when they are asked to concede a little bit of that power, they feel threatened. And I think that was really symbolised in the disrespect of that action today.
Councillor Jill Day, who tabled the original proposal, angrily pushed back against the Mayor's final ruling in favour of Councillor Rush.
I'm tabling a notice of motion which asks for the same thing that I was going to do. It's a shame that my colleagues have chosen to be disrespectful to a process which is still important. There is a connection. This is about representation.
She says while council staff haven't recommended it, she'd like Wellington to have a Māori ward.
That debate wasn't really going to happen because of what had been recommended. So this was a way of debating and discussing how we can improve representation now, which is the most important thing to do.
She hopes that in the future, councillors may be able to discuss the possibility for a Māori ward, although there isn't support from all mana whenua at this time. Mo te hōtaka o te ata, ko Mediana Johnson, DNA.
It is 23 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A Wellington heritage house gutted by fire last night will be demolished. The property at 128 Abel Smith Street was built in 1898 and was a popular hangout for political and community groups before being abandoned last year. Investigators have been unable to enter the property today because it's too unsafe, and they still don't know if anyone was inside at the time of the fire. Our reporter Jonathan Mitchell's story begins outside the house with an eclectic history.
The house was run as a private hospital. It was bought by the Lebanese Society in the late 1950s. The Aro locals and activists volunteered to restore it in the early 2000s. In 2007, it was raided by police as part of the Urewera raids. It was commonly known as the Anarchist House. It's been a popular spot for political and community groups, sitting in a prominent position from the Wellington Urban Highway. Aro Valley resident Asher witnessed the fire and returned to the site this morning to see the burnt remains in the light of day.
Oh, it's sad. It's a beautiful house. I really would have liked to have seen it fixed up and lived in. Yeah, there's not enough of these old houses around here anymore.
Another local looking at the damage says it's a shame to lose such an iconic building.
Sorry to see another heritage building disappearing. That, what will we find here next? And Wellington will never be the same.
A community activist and organiser, Emily Bailey, stayed at 128 Abel Smith Street as a live-in caretaker until around 2010 and helped run it as a radical community centre, which included an op shop, art space and library.
I guess it helped develop me into the person I am today by hanging out with people who were keen to make the world a better place and challenge a lot of stereotypes and norms and work for change.
She was in shock when she heard the news last night. It was a special place.
I've got lots of really good friends still from that time, and we still see each other and work together, some of us, and I've got lots of photos and memories, and I'll carry those, and I'll go back to see the site when I'm in town next and say goodbye, I guess, and see what happens to the space over time.
Wellington City Councillor Tamitha Paul used to swap clothes and visit often when she first moved to the capital.
It was definitely a safe place to be. Like, you could go there and know that you're not being judged for what you're dressed like or what you look like or the different communities that you come from. So it's definitely a safe space, but you could also tell that there was a lot of history within that house.
A Wellington-based historian, Gabor Tort, says the house was Wellington summarised within four walls.
It was young, it was edgy, it was idealistic. It just had so much energy around that building. That's what I really miss about it, and it's so sad to see it go like this.
The Lebanese Society has owned the house since the late 1950s. It says it was not formally occupied and had no power supply. The Society's secretary, Stephen Wakim, says the groups that used the premises were asked to leave last winter because the building was not structurally sound.
We had a really good relationship with the groups that were using the building. That was last year that we finished those conversations. So I'm not sure really what has motivated the incident at all. Yeah, big question mark.
Police and fire teams have been at the scene all day with a road cordon in place. Investigators have been unable to get inside because it's unsafe. The police say the building will have to be demolished. They say inquiries are continuing into the cause of the fire and whether there may have been anyone inside at the time. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell.
Lots of businesses all around the world have been forced to change the way they operate as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Gyms in Mexico are closed because of social distancing requirements. But one gym owner who's keen to keep money coming in and keep his staff employed has diversified his business in quite a major way. Deutsche Welle's Rob Watts explains.
It's usually a place of such energy, but this fitness club could barely be more quiet. It's one of the many Mexican gyms forced to close because of the coronavirus pandemic. Its staff, like its machines, were left idled. That was until they began burning fat of a different kind. Welcome to Mexico City's newest taco takeaway. Due to the closure of gym facilities, we had to think about how to move forward and look for a way to earn income. It's been pointed out that converting a gym to a taqueria is not the obvious choice. These are not exactly health foods, are they? It's a really funny thing, actually. There are already memes out there saying that we've become exactly what we set out to destroy. It's also been a big leap for the gym's staff, who've gone from sculpting six-packs one week to preparing meat snacks the next. It's been very different for me because I haven't cooked like this in my whole life, and now I'm learning. It'll be a while until they can return to their usual vocation in the gym. But in the meantime, at least they may be generating some new potential clients.
Deutsche Welle's Rob Watts with that story. To your feedback now, and on the issue of COVID testing and this so-called blitz, this listener says, I think people got terrified when they saw early tests take place. I had a test just over a week ago and there was nothing unpleasant about it at all. Would be very happy to get retested again and again. And a number of our listeners are getting in touch about the issue of mental health, and in particular the 2 mental health units that have been, called out by the Chief Ombudsman. This person says all that money allocated to mental health, shocking that it never reaches the patients. Money soaked up by middle management, surveys and restructuring. I am appalled, says Jackie. Ray says the WDHB statement is bloated on rhetoric. Hiding behind privacy is contemptible. The questions are about the case, not about personal details. And this from a concerned mental health professional. Contrary to the Health Minister's statement, clearly a rundown and poorly resourced secondary and tertiary mental health service has been acceptable for too long and will no doubt continue to run on empty and not address the core issues. On a much lighter note, someone is suggesting Jane reckons the new baby rhino at Auckland Zoo could be called Sunshine because the whole world needs cheering up. Here's my favourite, Pavlova. It likes to dance, named after the Russian ballerina.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The High Court will not hear from convicted terrorist Brenton Tarrant at his sentencing. Pip Hall QC, who has been on standby, will make submissions on Tarrant's behalf tomorrow on day 4 of his sentencing for the murder of 51 worshippers at 2 Christchurch mosques. The court heard the last of the 93 victim impact statements this afternoon. Public transport staff will not be required to make people scan the QR code for the government's COVID-19 tracing app. However, codes must be on display from Monday, the same day that people must wear masks on buses, planes, taxis and rideshare services. An investigation into the use of taxpayer money for the America's Cup has found no evidence of financial impropriety. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has completed its audit into allegations made against Team New Zealand